Okay, so I'm going to talk about how there's no church in the New Testament, and how the word, when it has been translated as church, actually is referring to community, and specifically the community of Israel. So there's a lot of stuff that I cover in. I did a little audio, and I'm probably going to post that, but it's like really long. So, but that hasn't stopped me from posting before. So I'll just post it with some, well, whatever. And so basically, the Messianic Jewish position is that Christianity was not established as we know it today until the late 2nd century. But prior to that, from the time of Yeshua up into the time of about probably after 130 AD, somewhere in that time, there was a concerted effort to move away from all things Jewish. And we can see that in the Bar Kokhba revolt that occurred. Simon Bar Kokhba, who was thought to be another Messianic figure, led a revolt, a Jewish revolt against Rome again, and they were defeated. And of course, everybody was against. All the Romans were against the Jews, and at the time, Christians were Jewish, but so there was an effort amongst a lot of Gentiles who were being born at that time to begin to disassociate themselves with all things Jewish. And so we can see that in stuff like the history that we have of Marcion. If you want to look up Marcion in Wikipedia, I'm going to put a link right here in the description on Marcion. And he basically felt that Christians were too Jewish at that time. And so he led an effort to purify the gospel, so to speak. Boy, that sounds familiar. It seems like everybody's always trying to purify the gospel. At any rate, so when you start putting all these pieces together, the Bar Kokhba revolt, the theology of Marcion at the time, who, by the way, was in between that time period of like AD 130 to AD 160. We also have a number of smaller Christian sects, which were referred to as Judaizers. But from a Messianic point of view, what we see is believers who were staying true to their calling as Jewish people and believing in a person that they felt was the Messiah, a Jewish Messiah. And so the more you look at history and you really start to study these things, which I've been studying them for quite a while, you begin to see that the earlier back you go into Christianity, Christian history, the more Jewish it looks. And so this is the Messianic point of view. And I'm going to name off a few other things here as well, but regarding the translation of the word church, and there was no church at the time of Christ. In fact, when Jesus says to Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church," he's not referring to a church, because at the time there was no church. and nobody would have known what a church was anyway. He was referring to a community, and specifically, he is referring to the community of Israel. Now, how do we know this? Well, for one, Jesus is Jewish, okay, and he's talking to a Jewish audience. Two, he's referring to a covenant, okay, and when he's talking about building his community, well, for one thing, the fact that everybody's looking to him as a Messiah, they're looking to him as the leader of that community. Okay, so what do we know that is the most defining moment? One of the most defining moments in Jewish history is at the foot of Mount Sinai, where Moses gives the commandments, the 10 commandments, to the community of Israel. And actually that word in Hebrew is kahal. Now, stay with me on this, but in the first, 2nd century BCE, we get the Greek Septuagint, which is a translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. And if we look back on that Greek word at the foot of Mount Sinai, when it talks about the community of Israel, it says the ecclesia, or if you want to pronounce it, ecclesia. And that is the word that we translate as church in the New Testament, is ecclesia. It means those who are called out, or actually referring to a greater community. And so when those who wrote the New Testament refer to a church, in every single instance they're using the word ecclesia. And we know from the Hebrew that the crossover word from the Greek Septuagint to the Hebrew scriptures, in Hebrew it's kahal. So what is Yeshua referring to when he says that upon this rock I will build my kahal? That's really what he means. So it's not that he's building his church and changing the whole plan of the Jewish people. It's not like God changed his mind. God chose Israel, and he said that he would never forsake his people. So why would God suddenly change his mind? Is not God the same yesterday, today, and forever? Why would he change his mind and say that, oh, I know the Jews were my people, but now they're not, and say, oh, well, I'm gonna create a new, the Greeks are gonna be my people now, and I'm gonna call them Christians, and and of course we know that, the Christians they never called themselves Christians. That's what other people called them. And there's some debate, by the way, about that word Christian too, and it has to do with, probably the correct pronunciation was Christus or Christian. We know this because of the some of the historical works that have been released at that time, like Pliny the Younger, referring to actually it was another Roman historian. I'll put that in here, but he referred to Christus and how these Christians were singing praise songs to Christus, and he talked about how he had to round them up and arrest them or something of that nature. But like I said, I'll give you the exact wording there. But anyway, long story short, I don't want to get into the whole thing here, but everything about Christianity is about authority. if you look at the Catholic Church, it's all about priesthood authority. If you look at the Mormon Church, it's all about priesthood authority. If you look at like Pentecostals, it's all about, you committing your life to a prophet and, somehow taking on the mantle of that prophet. And I'm not downplaying that at all or anything like that. I'm just saying that Judaism is really about a covenant. And when Yeshua comes, he's not doing away with that covenant. He's not doing away with the community of Yisrael. So you need to understand that when you read the New Testament and where it says that, the church is this or the church is that, and the churches in Asia or whatever, that it's referring to the communities, or rather the kahal of Israel. And so what we need to realize is that there's no church, there is no true church, because really it's never been a church. It's always been a community of Israel. And if Gentiles want to become a part of that community, then that's fine. That's fine. And so, I'm not downplaying church. I go to church still every once in a while. They're good places to go. But I'm talking about the actual meaning of the translation. And we have to understand that we have gotten caught up in so much theology in regard to the church. Like, the church is the bride of Christ. How many times have you heard that? The church is the bride of Christ. Well, the whole thing is that there is really there's a spouse of God, and that is Israel. Okay? And, the kahal of Yisrael is the spouse of God. We get caught up in this church concept, and then that takes us into this church age, which is some sort of dispensation, which is totally based on the concept of Jesus establishing some kind of a church, when that's not what he did. He didn't come to establish his church. That's not what he did. So I'm going to go ahead and post my other posting that has a little more nuggets of history in it. I think, so I don't know what else to say. I can just keep going on and on and on. Okay, real quick. Ecclesia in the translations. The goal of William Tyndale's life was to produce an accurate translation of the scriptures for the people of England. His New Testament was published in 1525. In it, he translates ecclesia as community. There is no church in Tyndale's translation. For Tyndale's efforts, the church had him burned at the stake as a heretic. It is not without significance that throughout history, the greatest, most enduring opposition to the scriptures has come from the church. As Tyndale faced death, he said, "I call God to record that I have never altered against the voice of my conscience one syllable of his word, nor would do this day if all the pleasures, honors, and riches of earth might be given me." Some say that 90% of the King James Version is taken from Tyndale's translation. What the exact percentage may be, the King James translators chose not to take most of translation from Tyndale. They did not choose, however, to use his translation of ecclesia. They were commanded not to. The translators of the King James Version had the following rules that govern how they were to translate the text. The third rule said the old ecclesiastical words to be kept, viz. The word church not to be translated congregation and small c. The Church of England and the King of England, who was the head of the church, needed the word church in the Bible, even though it wasn't there. So a rule was established to prevent the translators from correctly translating ecclesia. They therefore rejected the community of Tyndale's translation and the congregation of Puritan translations. King James, who was an ardent advocate of the divine and unchallengeable right of kings to rule over all, had an important stake in the translation of the text. Okay, so I'm going to put just a little link over here, along with my other links, to the rules for the King James translators, if you want to look at it. I think also there you can look in the beginning of the King James Version translation, and it'll have those same rules in there. I couldn't find, but anyway, there's a link right. I couldn't find a King James Version in my house, so there's a link right there to the general rules laid out on how they were supposed to translate the word ecclesia, and also a link to Bar Kokhba Revolt and Marcion. Alrighty, bye.